stuffed it completely. Anybody else? You just want to prove a point? A couple other things. Hacker Arcade's still going on. We got quite a number of folks playing yesterday. It'd be helpful if people dropped in more quarters. Some of the games don't even have quarter slots, so just have big holes. So if you want to shove a 20 in there to support the FF, that would be fantastic. The one thing, the kiosk works, and man, is it sexy. So if you play the Hacker Arcade and you put in your USB dongle and it gives you the tokens. We got this fancy Flash application that you can then go to the registration desk and plug it in, and it looks like the iTunes Rolodex interface where everything flips over and you can just choose what you want to buy. It's really hot. The problem is it took a while to write, and we didn't get online until yesterday about 4. So the prices for all the stuff in the Hacker Arcade have actually come down pretty dramatically. So even if you suck at Galaga, and I assure you no one sucks more than Freshman at Galaga, and I think he can even get a ticket, he's horrible. I mean, he makes my catching look like a Golden Glove nomination because he cannot play Galaga at all. Is he here? Damn, I was hoping he was going to be in the room for that rag. Anyway, feel free to go to the Hacker Arcade, play a little bit, and then go to the front. Get yourself a Ninja Rubber Duck, get yourself a Titanium Spork. We have the little stuffed germs, the cold germs, and all that kind of thing. There's all kinds of neato prizes. If you just put in a USB dongle, play for a few minutes, you're assured of winning something. So, and Major's actually firing up Open Office. So that's a promising thing. And it looks like we actually have a pretty good crowd today, so I haven't heard any weird incidents of people passing out on the Calvert Street Bridge and spending the night out there or anything like that. That's where Jay Beal is. Yeah, Ben had a rough night as well, from my understanding. All right, so are you ready now?
Pretty much.
Pretty much? I don't want to put you on the spot.
I've only got about 10 minutes worth of material, so we got better.
He says he's going to run long. After this, we got one more set of talks and 3 tracks, and then what we need everybody to do is at least scoot away from where this one wall is and this wall, because they're going to suck off half the wall and shove it back in magically over there, and open this up for the plenary sessions for the OLPC panel, and then the final thing where we'll give away all the extra swag and announce all the winners of the contests and all that good kind of stuff. So there's a pretty good swag this year, so stick around. And also, please, at the end, I'm going to say this for the rest of the day, if you got feedback on what went well, what went bad, fill out the speaker feedback forms, let us know what happened. The speakers really get a lot from the speaker feedback forms. Unfortunately, last year we had 400 more attendees than the previous year, and we had about 1/10 of the participation in the speaker feedback forms. We couldn't even give speakers real data points. Some of them only got 1 form, if that. So please fill out the speaker feedback form, even if it's just a 3-second you run through and you lie. Just put something down so we have something to tell the speakers. So Major's, he's got batteries. You made it through TSA with all that stuff?
Yeah, again, I've got something to say about that.
Yeah, okay. I don't even have any giveaways to give away right now. I have this. We give the Shmoo ball back? Oh, blame it on him. I think there might be more up here, but I'm not sure. Has anyone actually bought extra Shmoo balls? Who's thrown a Shmoo ball this year? Hey! Well, good. Hey, 2 in a row. Oh, for your hold it. And, oh, nope. Do you need an assistant?
Yeah, I need, does anyone have one of these batteries? A 9-volt battery, anyone?
If not, we can get on it. Is Bob here, Fleck? Yeah.
Yeah,
all right.
Normally the radio mics take them, so.
We'll try to hook you up with that. Is there anything else you need?
That should be it.
Good, because I didn't want to have to parade around here.
If someone wants to be my tech bitch and come up here and try and make this work, that would be. So I don't keep you. Yeah. Okay. So I'm ready.
You square? All right. So without further ado, here's Major.
Okay, so some of you, the more observant amongst you, although after last night that's probably difficult. So yeah, first of all, thank you, Shmoo and Heidi. for the party last night, and damn you, Bruce, for putting me on the next morning. Some of you may have noticed the discrepancy. Okay, they keep referring to me as Major Malfunction, which is obviously my real name. Sometimes when I'm undercover, you know, I live in this carefully constructed fancy world where I think I'm a secret agent, and you know, I have a base in a nuclear bunker and all this crap. So when I think there's a Fed in town, I go under my cover. And I don't want to worry anyone, but I think there may be a Fed in town. So. Okay, so Bruce talked at his opening talk about, you know, people doing security for the wrong reasons. Sorry, I'm slightly out of breath from doing all this stuff. You know, that's something that's really close to my heart. I kind of look around all the time, look at the environment I'm in, and think about security issues. And I spend too much time in hotels. And hotels are very target-rich environments. So I kind of find a lot of parallels. And some of you may know my other work that I've done on infrared and stuff in hotels. So before we start, I was just going to share something with you that I was at a conference earlier this week in a brand new hotel. So I was thinking, okay, this is going to be interesting. State-of-the-art hotel, they're going to have really, you know, good security on all their stuff. And I was actually hoping they would have RFID room keys, but they didn't. They just had mag stripes. But anyway, I found something in the room to play with. And I'm just going to quickly show you that. Now, I did a little video of it. I didn't bring it with me. That would be bad. But I brought a video of it. And I showed the video to one of the others at this conference, and he came up with what I thought was a really nice method of presenting it. So I'm going to try and kill two birds with one stone here. And I'm going to try it out on you guys and also get the material I need to do it. So what he suggested was I get a voiceover to go with the video. So I've got a printout from the manufacturer's website. So I need a volunteer, a female who can speak in a sort of confident, sexy, salesy voice. Yes, please. And can climb over chairs, that's good. Do you want to take the podium? What's your name?
Sherry.
Sherry. Sherry, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so what you're going to do is read this section. I've crossed out the name of the manufacturer to protect criminally negligent. But, so you're going to read that just in a normal speed. The whole thing takes about 59 seconds. So this bit, then the features, and those features there, okay? When I say go. Okay, so who saw Johnny Long's talk? Okay, who saw Johnny Long's talk? Okay, no tech hacking, or low tech hacking. So this is one of my pieces of tech. This is the other piece of tech. So let's have a show of hands. How many of you have ever stayed in a hotel? Okay, keep your hands up. How many of you have ever used the safe in a hotel? Okay, you're going to like this. Okay, when you're ready.
Through the past 3 decades, we have developed the largest line of in-room hotel safes in the world, specifically designed with the particular needs of the hospitality industry in mind. Our safes are available in a wide variety of dimensions and colors, with either electronic or mechanical locking systems. Manufacturer continuously researches the development of new features, options, and designs for its products. From removable core locks to a variety of electronic systems with digital keypad, credit card readers, or chip cards, manufacturer offers you products in the forefront technology. Our safes are installed in the most prestigious hotels and cruise lines throughout the world, which have recognized manufacturer for its quality, warranty, and superb technical service. Our uncompromising pledge of satisfaction to the client.
So how many of you are going to use a hotel safe in future? Say again? In new ways. Okay, so let's real talk. So RFID, I'm not going to talk about too much about the actual hardware, the way it works and so on. What I'm going to talk about is the underlying technology and the protocols and what it's being used for. But in principle and basically RFID chips, there are two kinds. There are active and there are passive. I mostly looked at the passive stuff, and basically the chip just sits there until it gets woken up and energizes the reader, and the reader then talks to the chip. So it's being used. Is there anyone from HID here? Oh, hi. Any patent attorneys here? Okay, so some of you may have seen a talk got pulled from another conference recently because their HID were talking about slapping a breach of patent on them. So I'm not going to talk about HID in too much detail, just enough so you know what to do. So HID, one of the class of devices where it's just a simple ID. Okay, there's no real interaction between the card and the reader. It just presents an ID. The smarter cards, things that are used for payments and stuff, and the things you'll find appearing in your credit cards and other devices like passports, they actually have a processor and memory and stuff in them, and they can store more information, and they can actually perform operations like crypto operations. So first we'll look at the simple ID devices. The kind of things they're being used for: animal IDs, hotel keys, car immobilizers, ski passes. A lot of goods now, I think if you buy anything at Gap, they have a tag sewn into the label. Luggage handling, if you go to Tokyo recently, you'll have an RFID luggage tag on your bag. And human implants, which is something I take a particular interest in. So this kind of made me laugh. That's a good approach. But I have to say, you'd have to give me a hell of a lot more than a digital camera and MP3 player to get me to stick one of those things in me. But I thought that was funny. The kind of things that human implants are being used for. The military apparently are using them for access control to some of their facilities. So if you're a high-ranking officer, you get to have this jabbed in your arm. They talked in the UK about putting them in mental patients. So I guess if you're totally confused and you leave the premises, they can find you and grab you and scan you and figure out who you are. And quite a nice idea in principle, the beach bar thing. So instead of having to take your wallet to the beach and risk having it stolen while you're swimming, there's a bar in Spain, a beach in Spain, where all the vendors along the beach are collaborating to do this project. So you can, thank you. You can leave your wallet in the hotel safe, right? Yeah, exactly. There you go. So I don't have to troll down the beach with wallets anymore. I just stay in the hotel. So in principle, a nice idea. But they all do one thing, which is they rely entirely on the uniqueness of the ID. That's all they're doing. It's not a proper payment system. It's just show me the ID, that links to a database which then has some stuff stored in it. And if you go and research these things on the internet, you'll find a lot of manufacturers saying, absolutely guaranteed, unique ID, these devices cannot be cloned, we have patented this, patented that. So inevitably, people have done it. They've produced kit that will clone the IDs. Okay? So you and I can spot the difference here. Just about. And this is one made by Jonathan West, who's a very talented researcher. He publishes all his gear build one of these, the circuit diagram is on that website, plus the software that you can run. And what this device does is it will just listen. You press a button and it will listen until it sees a valid tag, and then it records it. You press the other button and it goes into playback mode. So the industry defense when this comes out, there's always an industry defense, isn't there? So we don't have to worry about this because, so you can imagine the techie sort of going to his boss and going, oh my God, it's game over, you know, they're cloning our tags. And the boss is thinking, oh well, the executives will get together and we'll come up with a solution. So you can all relax now, nothing to see here. That's not a true clone. Thank God for the executives. So we're safe, don't worry. But obviously, see the form factor of the device. So it's, as far as the reader's concerned, that the chip equals the clone, whatever. And in fact, you know, this isn't particularly new. When I did some research for this talk and I looked at what had been done on the internet, these things have been popping up all over the place. You know, there's dozens of different designs. This last one is actually from Circuit Seller, I believe. So it's a weekend hobby, make yourself a chip cloner. But not a worry, none of them look like chips, so we're safe. Okay, so I took that as a challenge. Can I create a true clone that follows the same form factor as the original? Same ID, same form factor. So in order to do that, first of all, we have to understand what the actual ID looks like. So I'll take an example, animal tagging. So there's a standard called ISO 11784, which is used all over Europe. I'm not sure if it's used here. I've seen some discussions that this is bad somehow, maybe because it can be cloned. But it's a worldwide standard. So basically it contains 3 bits of information. It contains a field that says what type of application it is. Is it an animal or a non-animal? 3-digit code, which is the manufacturer's code, and then they each assign their own unique IDs within that space. So the way it actually works is that the reader and the tag will talk to each other and exchange data. As I said, the reader will wake up the tag. Tag will give out its ID. And it does that, the way the standards work is each manufacturer will decide for himself exactly what frequency he's going to send the data on, what bit rate it's going to communicate at, which is usually the frequency divided by some factor of 2. What encoding scheme he's going to use, so FSK, Manchester, biphase, whatever, and then a specific bit pattern, so he can recognize this is one of my tags. Okay. So in the case of the ISO standard animal tag, if I took the raw data from a dumb reader that's not trying to interpret, what I would see is 8 bytes, okay? And within those 8 bytes, you then get the national ID, the country, and the application code. And to decode those, you jump through a number of hoops. I've put them in the slides so those who are interested can look at them afterwards, but I'll just flash through them now. So you reverse the bits. You then reverse each nibble. You then end up with 8,000 for the application ID, F65, which you right shift and then turn into decimal. And then if you go to icar.org, that they have a complete list of who has been assigned these codes, so you can look up who's the manufacturer of this chip. And then they will give out the ID numbers. Okay, so if I want to encode one of those, obviously I know the algorithm, I can just turn it on its head, do it the other way around. And then in addition, I have to add the headers that the manufacturer is going to put into the chip to identify the chip to his reader. So in this case, what they do is they break the ID up into little chunks, and then they put a 1-bit, a 1 every now and then. And what that does is it ensures that you can't accidentally get the header pattern appearing in the binary data stream, because the header has a long chain of zeros in it, so that 1 would So then a CRC on the end. Okay. So now we've got our raw 128 bits of raw bit level ID. How am I going to deliver it? So, you remember the original challenge was get it in the same form factor as the original. So I thought about, if I was a manufacturer, what am I going to do? I've got this proliferation of RFID types and standards coming out. I'm not going to tool up to build all those different types. So obviously what I'm going to do, I'm going to make one transponder which I can then program to be any of the standards out there. Lowers my cost, makes it much easier to distribute, and it's obviously much more convenient. So I started looking at the tags that are out there to see if that was actually possibly what they'd done. And sure enough, I came across two types. So there's a tag called the Q5. And the Q5 is completely independently configurable. So you can set the bit rate, you can set what modulation you're going to do, and it has a chunk of memory which you can store your ID in. There's another standard called HiTag2, which basically has 3 different modes. So there are 3 different combinations of those parameters which are used on applications. And those applications, so far I've seen 3 distinct applications. One is ID tags, 2 is car transponders, and 3 is the implantable chips. So 3 very popular uses of device. So basically, to achieve the actual delivery, what I did was take an existing door entry tag, so one of these, and reprogrammed it to be what I needed it to be. So set the bit rate, set the modulation. In a couple of cases, you have to invert the data. And basically, you tell it how many blocks. It can store a number of blocks of data. You tell it how many of those blocks to dump when you switch it on and wake it up. So I'm going to have a go. If I can get my batteries working, I'm going to have a go and try and demonstrate this to you now. So bear with me a second. Okay, so someone asked about TSA. So, yeah, obviously, how many people flew here? Yeah. So I carry a lot of this kind of weird crap with me. So I have things with wires and batteries and so on. And as I was coming through security, a couple in front of me had a newborn child. So there's a woman with her child in the pram and a guy. And they wave her through and they push all the luggage through the scanner and they take the child through and they take the pram through and then the guy's left. And he's got with him 6 bottles of milk, okay? And they're like, you can't take fluids on the plane. He said, it's milk for the child, I've got to take it through. And the guy's like, well, okay, exception, you're allowed to take that through, but you have to taste it to prove that it's not something bad. So I'm thinking, okay, what kind of milk is that? You really love your wife, right? So anyway, the guy, they're causing a big hold-up, and there's a lot of people kind of waiting for this all to be done with. And there's like 3 security guys, all the guys who are manning that stand have crowded around and watching this process, making sure that he tastes all bottles. And then they scan each bottle. So anyway, they're done and they get through and they've made a horrible mess. There's milk everywhere. I didn't taste it. But, so I'm thinking, great, that's really what I needed. I'm going to get all this attention now. There's 3 guys. They're all focused on this screen and my bags come through. And there's wires and there's circuit boards and there's batteries and there's all the bad stuff. And these guys are like looking at it, going, what the hell is that? And nudging each other. Then he looks at me and says, "There's no fluids in there, are there?" So, you know, we talk about ticking boxes. So they're ticking the fluids box and ignoring everything else. So here's my bomb, which unfortunately the battery's come off again, so bear with me. Do need a help. Need a help? Actually, I am going to need someone in a minute. So, your challenge is to get the black wire and the... Okay, while they're doing that, I'll get the other bit ready that I need. If it works, that red light will come on. Have knife will travel. They're cutting my kit to pieces. What are they doing? Okay, we'll just get the detonator attached and we're... That was just working just now. Where's the knife though? Sure you got them the right way around? Okay, so can everyone see this red light? Yeah? Blinky. Okay, so if you put a valid tag to the red light, this is a door opener. Okay, so normally you walk up, this thing activates the door latch. So I've just connected it to a LED so you can see the activation. So valid tag opens the door. Invalid tag does nothing. So if I take my valid tag and I find out what the ID number is on this tag, so here I have a little keyboard wedge reader. Can everyone read that? Okay, so just holding the tag to the reader will spit out its unique ID. It also tries to execute it as a program, but we don't care about that. Okay, so these tags are sold under the brand name Unique, okay? So I have a little bit of Python. I tell it it's a unique ID. And I want to write it. Sorry. One day I'll learn my own code. Okay, so it's now waiting for me to present my blank tag.
How long can the tags be? How long can the ID be?
Depends. The question was how long can the ID be? It depends on the manufacturer of the tag. So they range from 8 bytes, 10, 16. It totally depends. Never do live demonstrations. Okay. So in theory, I've now cloned that tag, so if I stick it to my door reader, I'm in. Thank you. That's done. Thank you to my lovely assistant. So the other one I was going to show you was a cow implant, but my cow was detained at Heathrow, so I think it was all that milk, yeah. So she was taken as a suspect, so, you know, a collaborator or something. So anyway, I brought my little mouse along instead. So again, I'm going to need some help, and hopefully this will work. I'm going to plug in a web camera, and we'll try and get it so you can actually see what the reader's doing. But this is a standard animal identifier reader. So you press the red button, and you scan him, and it beeps and gives me a number. Okay. So again, if you don't mind coming up, and we got bags of time. Have I a chip implanted in me?
You're saying you wanted to implant a chip in me?
I have the tools. You might not like it.
No.
That's the needle they stick in you, okay? It's big and it's unpleasant. I'm going to pass it round.
She wants it this morning.
Okay, so
Where do you want this?
you're going to hold that.
Okay. On.
Okay, you might need some light. Where's that? Try sticking it. This is quite tricky, but you can do it. Has anyone got a flashlight? You're going to run out of hands here, I think. Ooh. Okay, so we'll see if we can get him to read. Okay, can you read that number? Nine 6 8 470 8897. Okay. Okay, so this is a standard called FTX Be. So I have a little program called FTX Be. I have to tell it it's an animal tag, and then the numbers. Everyone read that, okay? Okay, actually, before I do, I have to reset this tag. When I was first doing this, I got through a hell of a lot of tags, okay? So I ended up with this pile of, obviously I had a lot of failed experiments. So I ended up with this big pile of broken tags. So I had to write a reset program. Yeah, that's a special word for unique. Okay, so, actually, since we're going for like form factor, I'm going to go for the implant in my wrist. Okay, so I've got one in here, which I'm going to reprogram. So let's do that as well. What did I say about live demo? Stop, damn it.
Get him the needle, quick.
Yeah. I'll just replace it.
Defibrillator.
Wrong wrist.
Okay, I'll do it with the tag. It would have been good. So, in
Want to
theory,
go back to the other webcam? Can you see it?
I am that mouse. Okay, I actually bumped into a guy that at the various parties last night. There is a guy here who actually has an implant. So are you here? Excellent, Larry. So I'm not sure if this is going to work. We're going to try an experiment. He has an implant which he locks his laptop with. So we're going to see if I can clone his implant and unlock his laptop. We haven't rehearsed this. We don't know if it's going to work. So maybe we'll make history and maybe we'll look like idiots. RFIdiots. Okay, so that's locked. Do you want to just demonstrate unlocking it with your own tag? Should we get it up on the screen? Yeah? You can see it? Okay. Okay, so the tag locks and unlocks it. So what we would do is, obviously I would have to secrete this person somewhere, and we'd do the secret handshake, you know. So if we're lucky. Do you want to do it? You will. Yeah.
Make him a mouse.
No. That would be a challenge. Have you seen this guy? Okay, so I've got the ID. So,
They're the hex codes for RM minus RF star.
yeah. Actually, I was thinking about that because my thing tries to execute. If you can come up with a command that is a hex value, then you could own me. So, all you need is an implant, and you're done.
See you next year.
Yeah. Oh, it was the other window, wasn't it? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Don't you just love live demos? Okay, so in theory, do you want to hold it up? So, the moment of truth. Drum roll, please. Cool. Yeah. So, watch that man, tell me where he goes. Okay, so that was the unique ID-only stuff. So the obvious threats from this that I can think of is, you can track individuals, you can target individuals, you can, as we've shown, impersonate individuals. And actually, the other side of the coin of that, you can potentially produce an alibi for someone. So if everybody relies on these tags being absolutely guaranteed, okay, the implanted tag in that person is unique. If that tag was seen at a certain time at a certain place, then that person was definitely there. So you can be there being that person for them while they're actually off doing the bad thing. So, and at the far end of the scale, we always talking about terrorist threats and so on, so smart bombs that only go off when a target of sufficient interest is in range. So how do we combat this? Well, the obvious thing to do is make the chip smarter, actually have some kind of conversation, use encryption and so on. So the new passports, they have these chips in them. The clue that you've got a chip passport, if anyone's got a new passport recently, if it has this little logo on it, then you have a chipped passport. On the British passport, there's another clue, which is it's got this damn great chip in it. So it's the only one I've seen actually where you can actually see the chip. Most passports, they're hidden in the cover somewhere. At the moment, they only have your facial image and some other bits of data that are printed in the passport anyway. But they're talking about putting a hell of a lot more on there. If you go and read the specs, there's actually specifications for 48 individual items of data to be stored on there, including your fingerprints, biometrics, iris scans. In the UK, it would be the birth certificate, but a scan of the document you used to get the passport in the first place. How much data will the chip store in total? It depends. That's up to the manufacturers. Currently, I believe these hold about 32K, but the next generation will be bigger. They're like 64K or 128. And we're talking about actually storing the data on here, not linking it to a back-end database that has the data, but the data is actually in this device.
Or encrypted in some way?
Right. The question was, do they do anything to protect the data? Yes, what they do, they use authentication. So you can't just log into the chip and read it. You have to authenticate. And the authentication scheme we'll talk about in a minute, but it's called basic access control. Okay, and they use 3DES to do that. There's an option within the standard to also encrypt the data. However, basic access control is defined in the standard. You will do this. You don't have to implement it, but if you implement basic access control, you'll do it in this way. The content encryption says optionally you may also encrypt the files, but if you do, it's up to you how you do it. So there is no standard defining exactly how that encryption is going to work, and no one's doing it yet anyway. One thing they have done is to stop the threat of just tracking you by seeing the passport and saying, okay, that's passport number 1234, therefore you are in whoever. They give out a pseudo-random ID. So when I present, I'll show you in a minute, but when I present the passport to the reader, it will spit out a different ID number every time. Okay. So we've got this nice secure device. We've encrypted the login process, and we do strong authentication. So how do we generate the key? Basically, it's derived from the data printed on the second line of the passport. Okay. So these three fields, this is the document number, this is the date of birth of the subject, and this is the expiry date. Stick those three fields together, that's your key. Nice and secure. So we've had discussions. I mean, I'm not the first to publish this, but I have published this in the UK, and I've written some software that reads it. And the Home Office, the UK Home Office defense was, well, you've already got the passport in your hand, what have you gained? You know, you're reading this thing, you could read the key from the passport, and the data you've read out, you've got anyway printed on the screen. What have you gained? And what I actually did was prove that I could find that data without ever opening the passport. So a couple of, I think about 3 weeks ago, I was challenged by a UK national newspaper to do this. And they gave me a sealed envelope of somebody who had just applied for a passport. And in 4 hours, I was able to brute force my way into that passport and read all of her data without ever having met her. So we've definitely proved that you can get the key without having the passport. So I'm just going to quickly show you what is on there. Yeah, please do.
ID or a chipset that doesn't, because typically the way the U.S. is going to do a national ID, they're not going to encrypt it, they're just going to make it available so that every state can see it. Are we saying, if they use the same chipset, we're going to have a problem?
Yes, did everyone hear the question? No. Okay, national ID scheme is going to use the same standard. We have the same problem in the UK. That the national ID scheme in the UK is going to use the identical database, the same chip, the same data set. And in fact, you know, they're building the data by forcing collection of all of this extra data when you get a passport. So they're saying it's an optional thing. You don't have to have an ID card. But from 2010, I will not be able to get a new passport unless I give those 48 pieces of data to them, which they will then have in their database. So they've collected the data whether I want to carry the card or not. And yes, unless they agree on the standard of protection, that data is going to be at risk. Any other questions before I do the demonstration? Yes, sir.
The key, so how, let's talk about the process you do.
Okay, so the question was how I brute force the key. Basically, how weak the key on the passport is will depend on how your country issues the passports. So in the UK, they're issued sequentially. So because I knew the first 5 digits of the current sequence of issued passport numbers, I only had to brute force the last 4 digits. On the envelope of the passport was the processing date of that person. So I knew the expiry date of the passport, plus or minus 9 months. But I knew the day. That was the important bit. So I only had to brute force that one day for each of the 9 possible months that it could expire on. And I found out her birth date by going to a credit checking agency with her name and address, which I had on the envelope. So. The question was how many keys did I have to brute force? It was only 40,000. So I was doing 10,000 an hour, took about 4 hours. With my equipment, I can do roughly 3 keys a second. The problem is the time it takes to set up. You have to do a new challenge response for every attempt, but there's no anti-brute force mechanisms in the passport, so it doesn't lock you out after 3 failed attempts or anything. You can do as many as you want. But again, it would be so simple to make that secure, because that attack was only feasible because the brute force space was so small, because I could determine a lot of that key space. To make it, all they would need to do without changing the standard is randomize the passport numbers, for example, and then that would be an unfeasibly large key space. I could not brute force it in a reasonable time. So. Okay, so normally you would hand to whoever's going to check it, and they would swipe it through a machine called an MRZ reader, and that would read those 2 lines of text off the bottom of the passport and then derive the key from that. My software takes a version of that, just typed in at the command line. Okay, so it's read the printed data from the passport. It's now going on to read the image stored on there. This is slow because it's doing serial emulation. You can actually drive it a bit faster than this. So I was obviously much better looking when I went for my passport. This is actually my son's passport. So as you can see, the facial image is stored on there, the full name, date of birth, expiry date, the printable version, document number, and so on. So if you wanted to produce a fake passport, this data is exactly what you would need to print on the front page to have something that not only looked like the real thing, but actually is the real thing. If they have a back-end check of, what should this page should look like, it's going to match. So. Okay, so the question was the digital signatures on the data that's stored in the passport, if I've looked at those. Again, one of the Home Office comments was, it's already been demonstrated that you can clone these. Okay, I can buy a blank chip, I can read all this data off, I can write it back to the blank chip, and I've got a clone. What they say is you cannot alter it. Okay. The reason you cannot alter it is because each object is signed. So look at the output while I was reading that. There's a file here called EFSOD. That's the security object. The security object contains a digital signature and a hash for each of the other objects on the passport. So you've got the image, which is signed, and then you've got the signature in the security object, and the security object itself is also signed. In the security object, you've also got the public keys that belong to private keys that signed the objects. So you can check that that object hasn't been tampered with, has the correct signature. Now, can anyone spot the flaw in that recipe? Say again? Yeah, the public keys there, you could also alter the public key. So you're checking the object against another object that the same device gave you in the first place. So there is no way back and say, is that an authentic key? Yes, it matches, but how do I know that's not just a self-signed certificate? So there is a project called the PKD, which is the Public Key Directory, which is going to be available, allegedly, where you can go and you can look up the keys of all the signers. That system does not currently exist. If you go and read the working group papers on that system, they only actually agreed to tender sort of, I think, summer last year, and it's only actually gone out to contract towards the end of last year. So I can't see that system being online and working anytime soon. Any other questions?
If you are cloning and changing this, the country that you are entering will not have access to your home country's records. Technically speaking, unless this passport was used before and they know how you look like, technically speaking, to any country whatsoever using this technique.
Yeah, so the question was, could you, if you're entering a country that isn't your home country and they don't have access to the database to check the keys, could you enter on forged credentials? And that's the point. Yeah, unless there's a bilateral agreement currently in place between my country and your country, they cannot check that that's valid data. I'm told such agreements are in place and they are actually checking it, and we're not currently relying on this data anyway. But in the long term, clearly, the object of the exercise is to automate the whole process of entering countries, and there will be machines at passports that take your biometrics, automatically take your passport rather, and automatically read the data and let you into the country. So unless they get those systems working reliably and securely, we're going to have a problem. So again, some of the threats, the keys can be obtained through other channels, as I've demonstrated. I have found you can also profile certain passports. You can find out which country a passport's from because of errors in the implementation. So for example, the Australian passport, the first 2 digits of the passport ID is supposed to be 08, which indicates this is a pseudo-random number, not the real number. Actually, our very last thing I'll do is just quickly show you that. So basically, every time I place the passport on the reader, it will spit out a completely different number. And the first 2 digits are 08 to say this is not a real number, it's pseudo-random number. Okay. The US implements that wrong as well, so you don't have a 08 on of yours. Any other questions before I wind up? Yes, sir.
How far away can you be from a passport and still get the data out of it?
How far away can you read the passport? With my equipment currently, I have to be within about 3 or 4 inches. What I have done is I've built a Bluetooth version of the reader, so I can have a remote person put the reader next to your passport, and I can be up to 100 feet or even a mile away with the right antennas. So. Yes, sir.
Using security last year, something big wrong on that there, and that would be 60 feet.
Okay, so apparently somebody presented a paper where they demonstrated they could read data from 60 feet away. There are fundamental limitations because it's not actually RF, it's like magnetically coupled, and there's near fields and far fields, and I don't understand the physics, but there are some fundamental limitations where power and amplifiers won't get you anywhere. Yes, sir?
Look at the RFID chips in American Express cards and other payment systems.
Have I looked at the RFID chips in American Express cards? Yes, I saw one in Orlando earlier this week, and in fact I was able to clone the unique ID of that. It's using 1356. I don't think that would be enough to create a true clone of the chip, because there are probably data on there as well, which is crypto protected. But I was able to clone the ID, yeah.
As you mentioned earlier about the automatic lockout period and passport out for wrong price, is that something that can be implemented instead of redoing the whole system?
The question was, could you implement a lockout on the passport to stop you brute forcing it? I think the answer to that is probably not. The problem is, because it's a passive device and it only gets woken up by the reader, it doesn't have a memory unless you start allowing it to write back to itself. So you would have to completely re-engineer the chip to keep track of how many failed attempts there had been and so on. And I think it would just really horribly overcomplicate the thing.
It has a limited amount of memory, so you only have to have like a single bit where it's a writable memory on the thing where it wakes up and has actually the processor, so it checks how many times it sets.
Yeah, so the question is that really true? Because you only need to store 1 bit. The issue is, well, A, you would have to implement that as part of the standard, which nobody has yet, so you'd have to change the standard. But B, you can't be sure that you're going to stay awake long enough to complete the write cycle. So if you get removed from the reader field in mid-write, what happens? Last question.
You mentioned with the passport that there was sort of a pseudo-random ID that gets transmitted.
Yeah.
How do they?
How random?
Well, there's the how random, but also how do they account for skew? Like if you're playing with your passport and reading it at home, and it's the numbers.
Okay, the pseudo-random ID. How random is it, and how do they cope with skewing it? Because I've woken it up. The answer to the second question is they don't care. That ID is not used for anything. It's just part of what RFID chips do, so it has to answer to a wake-up sequence and give an ID number. But that ID number is not actually used for anything. As far as how random it is, I don't know, but if you go to my website, which is RFIdiot.org, you can download all of this software, and on there you'll find a file which has 1.5 million sequential IDs on it. So if you want to try and work out what the pseudo-random sequence is, be my guest. And I leave you with this thought from the manufacturers. I'm done. Thank you.